Welcome to Module 3, Unit 1, Intercultural Competence in a Foreign Language Classroom. To introduce this unit, we are pleased to present to you Ms. Ramonia Smith, a visiting professor from Jamaica, who is at UPN for a brief stay. We have invited her to present some of the key ideas of this unit, giving examples based on her personal experience coming from her country to her stay in Mexico. Before she begins, I would like to ask you, what do you know about Jamaica? What are some preconceived ideas you have? Jot them down before listening to her.
Thank you. I'm very happy to introduce this topic. The advent of globalization has called for an increasing demand for intercultural competence among citizens from all nations. This presentation reviews and summarizes intercultural competence and intercultural communicative competence in order to better understand how these notions can impact the cultural component of a foreign language curriculum and ultimately the foreign language classroom. Therefore, by the end of this presentation, you should be able to assess how culturally diverse you are, differentiate between linguistic, communicative, and intercultural competencies, and acknowledge the importance of understanding and studying culture when teaching and learning English. Analyze Byram's model of intercultural competence, distinguish and explain the core of each competence mentioned above. Analyze the core of the teacher in the development of intercultural communication in the language classroom. The concepts will be explained from two perspectives, using real-life experiences reflecting my living in Mexico, as well as visits to other Spanish and French-speaking countries, and presenting examples, scenarios, and intercultural comparisons, which will broaden your knowledge of Jamaican culture, thus preparing you to more effectively interact with people from that culture. In order for you to understand yourself as a culturally diverse individual, I'll ask you some fundamental questions. What are 3 central words that describe you, or a significant part of who you are, or how you choose to identify yourself to others? If you were to choose one word, what would it be? Why is this word the most important part of your cultural identity? Is there an identity that others do not readily recognize in you? Does this frustrate you? Have you gained any insights about yourself from answering these questions? It is important to realize that all people are complex and have multiple layers of identity. Identity influenced by history, religion, as well as socio-political issues. Our aim should be to learn about the identities of the people with whom we will interact, especially those from foreign cultures. We'll now review the background to intercultural competence. With increased globalization, migration, and immigration, there has been a growing recognition for the need for an intercultural focus in language education. Language is no longer the only aim of language teaching and learning. The standards define language goals in terms of 5 C's: communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities, which are designed to guide learners toward becoming viable contributors and participants in a linguistically and culturally diverse society. Let's now talk about the importance of intercultural competence in the foreign language classroom. Research on intercultural competence underscores the importance of preparing students to engage and collaborate in a global society by discovering appropriate ways to interact with people from other cultures. An interculturally competent speaker of a foreign language possesses both communicative competence in language as well as particular skills, attitudes, values, and knowledge about a culture. According to British educator Michael Byram, an interculturally competent speaker turns intercultural encounters into intercultural relationships. That is, someone determined to understand, to gain an inside view of the other person's culture, while also contributing to the other person's understanding of his or her own culture from an insider's point of view. When language skills and intercultural competency become linked in a language classroom, students become optimally prepared for participation in a global world. The use of the lingua franca, in many cases English, which is a global language, or sometimes Spanish, for example, becomes more and more important as the world quickly changes and people become more and more connected. A lingua franca has been defined as a language that is used primarily for communication purposes. Speakers retain their allegiance to their first language and use the lingua franca to be intelligible to others. For example, since I've been working at this university, I've had meetings and interactions with 4 friends or colleagues who are American, Spanish, English, and French nationals. When we're all together, the language of communication, or lingua franca, is usually English. Another example is my experience working as a CARICOM consultant in Suriname, where I presented a series of methodology workshops with their teachers of Spanish. These teachers did not speak English, and I did not speak French. Therefore, Spanish became the lingua franca. Through this medium, we were able to communicate comfortably and clearly. Interactions like these grow, it becomes increasingly necessary to ask, what is intercultural competence? How does it relate to communicative competence? At the heart of intercultural competence is the preparation of individuals to interact appropriately and effectively with those from other cultural backgrounds. As a result, understanding culture becomes an integral component of intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is quite different from communicative competence. Communicative competence involves 2 cultures, your own and the one you are learning, the target culture. Intercultural competence is less about knowing a lot of culture-specific information about various countries and more about communicating effectively in a range of cross-cultural contexts. Intercultural competence reflects common themes such as self-awareness and identity transformation, as well as the student or language learner as inquirer. We'll now talk about self-awareness and identity transformation. Byram uses such words as openness and curiosity to explain his conviction that an individual must remain open to learning about new beliefs, values, and worldviews in order to participate in relationships of equality. The transformation of attitude, including self-awareness and openness to new values and beliefs, is a vital first step to becoming interculturally competent. For example, as a Jamaican living in Mexico, knowledge of my own culture and identity became increasingly important. Of equal importance, too, was my willingness and tolerance to reflect on and, in some cases, dispel any preconceived notions and to see the world from the perspective of a Mexican citizen. This was achieved by studying and researching the country's history, customs, practices, and current affairs prior to my coming here, which even continued after arriving and having first-hand experiences and encounters. In addition, it was achieved through interacting with Mexicans from different cultural, social, religious, ethnic, and racial backgrounds on a daily basis. Let's now talk about the student or language learner as inquirer. When an intercultural classroom environment is described, student learning is frequently depicted as learner-centered, engaging, interactive, participatory, and cooperative. Intercultural competence defines the student as researcher or discoverer of knowledge, viewing the learner much like an anthropologist who explores and investigates a topic both in and outside of the classroom. Furthermore, 21st century foreign language teachers are no longer expected to transmit detailed information about the culture being studied to learners. Rather, they assume the role of facilitator, actively involving learners as they explore, discover, analyze, and evaluate meaningful information through primary and authentic texts, audio, video, and media. The fact that culture is an ever-changing force, foreign language teachers must be prepared to create an environment of curiosity and inquiry in order to guide learners toward intercultural competence. How do we engender intercultural competence in the foreign language classroom? We'll now talk about adapting Byram's intercultural model to classroom practice. The model has 5 characteristics. As we explore this model, I want you to assess to what extent you possess each of its characteristics. Byram depicts someone who gained skills in intercultural communicative competence as an individual who is successful in building relationships while speaking the foreign language of the other participant, negotiating how to effectively communicate so that both individuals' communicative needs are addressed, mediating conversations between those of diverse cultural backgrounds, and continuing to acquire communicative skills in foreign languages not yet studied. Gaining intercultural communicative competence is about more than simple exchanges. Rather, it centers on building relationships and engaging in communication even when the participants involved do not share the same worldview. Let's now talk about each aspect of the model. The first is intercultural attitudes, that is, curiosity and openness, readiness to suspend disbelief about other cultures and belief about one's own. This means that you are curious about where you are and you want to understand the people you are with. You ask questions and you listen to what people say. Byram explains that in order to be interculturally competent, you must be curious and you must be ready to learn about your own culture and other cultures in an open, non-judgmental way. For example, I had to be quite open to difference and newness regarding greeting someone for the first time with a kiss on the cheek. This is rather contrary to my culture, which is more formal during first-time interaction with someone. The most common greeting in Jamaica is the handshake. Once a friendship is established, women may hug and kiss on each cheek. Men often pat each other's shoulder or arm during the greeting process or while conversing. On the social scene, it is common for males to greet females with a hug and a kiss on either cheek. Female-female greetings can follow this pattern as well. Male-male greetings tend to be a high-five shake or simply a pat on the back, depending on the circumstances. Another example is my reaction to public displays of intimacy or affection. I had to demonstrate openness, acceptance, and objectivity, as this is not a very common practice in my country. I will give you a few examples relating to Jamaican culture. It's common to wait until invited before using someone's first name. This kind of interaction will begin as your friendship deepens. If you're meeting a Jamaican for the first time and want to make a good impression, what would be excellent discussion topics? Family, work, and hobbies are generally excellent topics of discussion when meeting someone for the first time, while discussion regarding politics and homosexuality may offend. Politics in Jamaica revolves mainly around two political parties, and it is often seen as a "if you are not with me, you are against me" dynamic, and this is taken quite seriously, particularly when elections are forthcoming. Open discussion on sexuality and declaration of one's sexual tendencies are not encouraged. Let's now talk about the skills of interpreting and relating. These refer to the ability to interpret events from another person's point of view, that is, decentering. Interpreting events from other points of view is similar to walking in people's shoes and seeing the world through their eyes. For example, obliging la cena and la merienda for me. In Jamaica, it is very common for families to sit together and eat, the two most important times being breakfast and dinner. However, this is mostly practiced on the weekends. Within the week, as we hustle with constraints of work and school, it is not usually practiced. Based on my experience here in Mexico, especially living with a family, I've noticed the high premium placed on having dinner or supper together even during the week. Therefore, at every invitation to supper, I remain courteous and accept the invitation, though I'm not accustomed to this, because from the other person's perspective, this act is very important. Let's talk about the skills of discovery and interaction. These refer to the ability to acquire new knowledge of a culture and cultural practices, and the ability to operate knowledge, attitudes, and skills under the constraints of real-time communication and interaction. Over time, you acquire new knowledge of the cultures and cultural practices, and you begin to use this information. For example, when I go out to eat at a Mexican restaurant, I no longer expect the waiter to offer to take the bill to me, even after being in the restaurant hours after making my last order. This realization came through a process of discovery and observation. The next characteristic is critical cultural awareness. This is the ability to evaluate critically and on the basis of explicit criteria, perspectives, practices, and products in one's own culture and that of other countries. This has to do with responding positively to other people's beliefs, values, and behaviors. I will present two significant examples. Mexico has been portrayed stereotypically by many Western movies as a place with predominantly traditional Spanish infrastructure. As such, this is what I expected before coming here. On my arrival, it was interesting to see how highly urbanized the city was, and that traditional buildings are mostly found in the Centro Histórico. Another example is that on numerous occasions, I've had to dispel many preconceived notions or break stereotypes regarding Jamaican lifestyle or culture. These notions are manifested in frequently asked questions. The most common were, if I smoke marijuana, or if all Jamaicans smoke marijuana, drink rum, or listen to reggae music. I have also been asked if Jamaica has malls or commercial centers. These examples also reflect other characteristics of Byram's model, as I had to exercise tolerance, a positive attitude, decentering, and openness in each situation. Let me now explain briefly Byram's conceptualization of intercultural communicative competence. You're already aware of communicative competence, which involves linguistic and sociolinguistic competence. These are integrated in Byram's model of intercultural competence to form intercultural communicative competence. One example of sociolinguistic competence within the intercultural framework was manifested one day during the lunch hours at the university when I was hungry and looking for the cafeteria or the canteen, and I asked a student, "¿Dónde está la cantina?" You can imagine the student's first reaction before realizing what I really wanted to ask. What are the objectives then of intercultural competence and intercultural communicative competence in the context of the foreign language classroom? In Byram's model of intercultural communicative competence, foreign language teachers are asked to guide learners through the process of acquiring competencies in attitudes, knowledge, and skills related to intercultural competence while using a foreign language. The focus therefore shifts from preparing students to communicate without error in order to survive in a foreign culture, to communicating openly in order to build relationships so that they can thrive in a foreign culture. Let's now talk about the role of the teacher. What is the role of language teachers in instructing students on intercultural competence? Teachers must be prepared to spend time guiding students to reflect on their preconceived ideas and perceptions before entering into studies of other cultures in the classroom. Language teaching should promote respect for human dignity and equality of human rights as a democratic basis for social interaction. However, before teachers can guide their students through this process, they themselves need opportunities to experience and reflect on cultural differences so that they can deal with their own attitudes. In concluding, it's important to say that if teachers want to prepare students for success in a globally interconnected world, intercultural competence must form an integral part of the foreign language curriculum. Researchers have identified themes, for example, identity transformation, student as inquirer, etc., that characterize an intercultural communicative competent classroom and that can assist teachers in creating learning tasks that will move students toward intercultural competence. When intercultural competence is an integral part of the language classroom, learners experience how to appropriately use language to build relationships and understandings with members of other cultures. They can examine their own beliefs and practices through a different lens, negotiate points of view that are different from their own, and gain an insider's perspective of another culture.